Welcome to Musings of a Murderous Mind. My name is James Hayman, and I'm the author of a series of thrillers starring Portland, Maine detectives Michael McCabe and his partner Maggie Savage. Last time we met, I read the beginning of a book called The Cutting to you, in which we saw the abduction of a young woman named Lucinda Cassidy and the interruption of a date between McCabe and his girlfriend Kira by the news that the body of a young girl named Katie Dubois had been found dumped and mutilated in an industrial scrapyard. I'm going to continue from that point and hope you enjoy it. And here we go with the next part of The Cutting. It took less than 5 minutes for McCabe and Savage to reach the scene. There were a couple of black and white units, blue lights flashing, blocking access to the area. Maggie pulled in behind one. They got out. McCabe grabbed a mag light and a pair of latex gloves from the trunk. The area was a small industrial wasteland slated for eventual development, maybe 2, maybe 3 acres. No more than that. Most of it was surrounded by a deteriorating chain-link fence. Yellow crime scene tape stretched across the openings in the fence and back another 30 yards or so. Piles of rusting scrap metal littered the landscape. A few clumps of weeds struggled for life in the stony hard pad. Other than that, just dirt, a lot of trash, and a dead body. Identity would have to be confirmed, but as they moved closer, McCabe became certain that it was indeed Katie Dubois. Even in the empty grayness of death, he could see Katie had once had a pretty face. Round with chubby cheeks, shoulder-length blonde hair tied into a ponytail. Eyes open and clouded over, revealing none of the horror one expected in the eyes of someone facing imminent slaughter. And slaughter it was. She'd been sliced practically in half by a deep cut that angled from just below her neck to just above her navel. The flaps of skin were folded neatly back in place. Circular burn marks were visible on her breasts and on her thighs near her genitals. There might be others hidden from view. The girl was naked. She lay on her back, knees up, legs spread, one arm angled straight back as though she had been reaching for something overhead, or maybe doing the backstroke. McCabe was sure she hadn't fallen this way. Someone had arranged the body in this position. McCabe stood for a couple of minutes, scanning the corpse, remembering the details of the case. Katie Dubois was 16 years old. She'd gone missing Wednesday before last. A junior at Portland High School and a star soccer player, she hadn't come home from a night out with her friends. She was last seen in the Old Port, hanging out with 5 other teenagers. Flyers from her photograph were stapled to telephone poles all over town. Tom Tasco and Eddie Frazier were the lead team on the case. They were experienced detectives and they'd worked it hard. McCabe read through their investigation reports and he found them impressively thorough. None of the other teens had any idea where Katie might have gone. Her boyfriend, Ronnie Sobel, told detectives he was talking to some friends, and when he turned back, Katie was gone. One of the girls said that wasn't quite how it happened. She claimed Katie and Sobel were arguing. She thought it had to do with Ronnie hooking up with another girl, but she wasn't sure. Anyway, she said when Ronnie walked away from her, Kate stormed off. Most of the department, as well as dozens of friends, family, and volunteers, had been looking for her ever since. They'd combed the city, the nearby Scarborough marshes. A lot of people thought she might turn up in the harbor, but she hadn't. She turned up here. McCabe felt a familiar rage growing within him. Murder in Maine tended to be a family affair. Husbands killing wives, friends killing friends. As often as not, they called the cops themselves as soon as they realized what they'd done. But this was different. This had the random, brutal anonymity of the big city, and McCabe allowed himself a moment to mourn a universe where one human being could do this to another, especially to a teenager. Then he put these thoughts away and let the cop side of his brain kick in. He inspected the corpse, inspected the ground where the girl lay, trying to figure out if there was anything he should be noticing. Anything that would give him a better idea of what had happened to Katie Dubois and who might be responsible for it. He saw signs of duct tape adhesive across her mouth and ligature marks on her wrists, ankles, and neck. Her clouded eyes revealed no signs of pinpoint hemorrhaging, suggesting that mutilation, not strangulation, was the immediate cause of death. Standing here in a scrapyard in Portland, Maine, McCabe suddenly had the feeling he was back in New York. It wasn't like he was imagining it or just remembering it. He could smell the stink of it. 100 bloodied corpses paraded before his eyes. His right hand drew comfort from resting on the handle of his gun. Mike McCabe, once again lured to the chase. He knew with an absolute certainty that this was his calling, that it was here among the killers and the killed that he belonged. No matter how far he ran, no matter how well he hid, he'd never leave the violence or his fascination with it behind. McCabe stepped back from Katie's body, careful not to trip over Maggie, who was kneeling a few feet behind him, writing her notes. He approached the uniformed officer who'd found the body. He remembered the man's name, Kevin Comiskey. Kevin, he said quietly, what do we know? Not much. I was on patrol. Quiet night. I just made the turn off Marginal into Franklin when this drunk comes running out, waving his arms around. He's screaming something about murder, but he's pretty incoherent. So I put him in the car, which, by the way, he stinks up pretty bad. I asked him to tell me where he saw whatever he saw. He manages to direct me here. I see the body, call dispatch. They send Kennerly as a backup, then they call you guys. McCabe used his cell to call police headquarters at 109 Middle Street. 2 evidence techs were currently on duty. He told both if they needed them at the scrapyard, ASAP. Then he called Deputy Maine medical examiner Terry Mirabito. Portland, with a population of a little over 65,000, wasn't big enough to have its own medical examiner's office. Normally, whoever was assigned would have to drive down from the state lab in Augusta, a good hour and some away. But Mirabito lived in town, and if she was home, she could get here a lot faster. She answered on the first ring and said she'd be right over. Where's the drunk now? McCabe asked Comiskey. Still in the unit, said the cop. It's going to take a lot more than a paper pine tree and a squirt of Lysol to get the stink out of that thing. Either of you guys touch anything or move the body around? McCabe addressed both uniformed officers. Both responded negatively. One said it's tough enough just looking at her. Okay, I'm going to wander around, see what I can see, said McCabe. Then I'll want to talk to your friend in the car, so please make sure he doesn't go anywhere. He turned to Maggie. Where are Tasco and Fraser? I thought this was their case. He knew he was sounding irritable, but tough shit. A detective should never lose track of his case. Mike, they've been putting in 18-hour days for over a week. Anyway, Tom's on his way in. I couldn't find Eddie. McCabe nodded and sighed. Find him. He turned away and used his cell to call home. Casey answered. Hey, Case, how you doing? Hello, Daddy, dearest. I'm fine, McCabe's 13-year-old daughter said in a playfully proper tone. Are you still eating dinner? Well, we never got to dinner, he said. I'm working. He wondered if Casey had known Katie Dubois. They were both soccer players. Probably not, he decided, though. Casey was still in middle school, 8th grade. I'm going to be late. What are you up to? I've got friends over. Do you want to talk to Jane? Oh, really? Who's over? Gretchen and Whitney. These were two of Casey's best friends and lived nearby on Munjoy Hill. Recurrent, kind of in the middle of something, doing her best to put on an aristocratic British accent, she added. I don't want to go into it. I'll fetch Jane. Okay, he laughed. Fetch Jane. As long as you're not doing something you're not supposed to. Dad, I'm not a baby, you know. Okay, get Jane. I love you. Love you too. McCabe could hear Casey shouting, Hey, Jane, it's Dad. The single syllable drawn out, Dad. Jane Devaney was a 60-year-old retired nurse and high school sex education teacher. McCabe employed her on a part-time basis to look after Casey. She also rode a Harley. Casey found that indescribably cool. So did McCabe. Jane's voice came on. Hiya, Mike. Everything good there? Oh, yeah, we're fine. Kids are fooling around doing girl stuff. I'm deep into Super Nanny, keeping tabs on the competition. I take it you're working late. Yeah, it looks that way. Want me to spend the night? Not necessary. I'm not sure when I'll be home, but Kira should be there as soon as she finishes dinner. Well, if you decide you do want me to stay, just let me know. It's not a problem. Thanks, Jane. I appreciate it. McCabe closed the phone and returned it to his pocket. He pulled on the surgical gloves he brought from the car. Pointing the flashlight at the ground, he started inspecting the area where the girl's body was lying. Senior evidence tech Bill Jacoby and his partner would arrive soon enough, but McCabe wanted to have a more thorough look around first. McCabe figured the girl was most likely killed somewhere else, and the body dumped here later. If so, he'd find little in the way of evidence. He saw no blood on the ground, and the blood on the body was dried and old. A greenish cast of decomposition was beginning to show on her abdomen. Katie Dubois had been dead for a while. McCabe guessed at least 48 hours. The ground was stone hard, so he doubted he'd find any footprints or tire tracks. But he watched where he walked and looked anyway. Also, he saw nothing to suggest the body had been dragged 30 yards or so from the street. No bent clusters of weeds, no visible scrapes of dirt around the girl's heels or head or shoulders. He figured the killer had carried Katie to where he dumped her. No great feat. She couldn't have weighed more than 110 pounds, even before she'd lost most of her blood. The killer would have gotten some of that blood on his clothes, possible evidence, unless he burned them. McCabe played his light over the girl's body inch by inch. The cut down the middle of her chest looked as careful and clean as if it had been made by a razor, or possibly a surgeon's scalpel. The burn marks were recent and deliberate. In the lobe of her right ear, he saw a small gold earring with a dangling heart-shaped charm. He moved the light to the left ear. The lobe was torn, and the mate to the earring, assuming there was a mate, was gone. Had it been accidentally caught on something? Possibly. Roughly pulled out? Maybe. Taken as a trophy? More likely. The girl's navel was pierced with a silver-colored, semicircular bar with tiny metal balls at either end. A blue tattoo that looked like a Chinese or maybe Japanese character adorned the skin above her left hip bone. She was a 21st century teen, no doubt about that. The crime scene techs arrived and began drawing their diagrams and taking their pictures. McCabe pointed out the remaining earring and asked the senior tech, Bill Jacoby, to make sure to check for both prints and DNA. Jacoby gave him a, "So what do you think? I'm stupid?" look in response. "Looks like somebody started the autopsy without me." McCabe turned at the sound of a woman's voice. State Medical Examiner Terry Mirabito stood behind him, looking at the body. "I think I resent that," she added, both on her behalf and mine. "Good to see you, Terry. Glad you're here." McCabe had worked with Terry on half a dozen cases over the past 3 years, and he valued her skills. After photographing the body from several angles, Mirabito knelt down for a closer look. "How long do you think she's been dead?" McCabe asked. "A while. She's out of rigor, only slight lividity." With gloved hands, Terry gently pulled back the fold of tissue on the left side of the girl's chest. McCabe could see what appeared to be grains of rice inside the cut, only the rice was moving. Maggots. "Judging by the activity in there, I'd say she was killed 48 to 72 hours ago. Maybe a little longer, depending on where the body was kept." Terry pulled the skin back a little further. "Well, son of a bitch, will you look at that?" "What? What is it?" Terry looked up, a grim expression on her face. "Her heart's gone." "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" "Just what I said, McCabe. Gone, as in not there." Terry was shining a small, high-intensity light into the girl's exposed chest cavity. Some creep opened her up, cut through her sternum with a saw, and removed her heart. I couldn't have done it cleaner myself. Neither said anything for a moment. "Ritual murder?" McCabe finally asked. "Beats the hell out of me, but whoever did it knew what they were doing." "You're assuming it was a he?" asked Maggie. "I am." Terry rubbed her gloved finger gently along the severed bone. "After he cut the sternum, like any good surgeon, he most likely used a retractor to spread her ribs and get at her heart." "I'm not sure how much more the autopsy will tell us, but maybe something. If we can get a positive ID by tomorrow morning, I'll do the procedure in the afternoon. We've got nothing else scheduled." There was an unsettled edge to Terry's normally cheerful voice. "You and Maggie want to join the party?" she asked. "Just leave word what time you want us to be there, and we'll be there." Terry turned back to the body and continued her preliminary examination. McCabe glanced over to the black and white Crown Vic with the flashing lights and the Portland police slogan, "Protecting a Great City," emblazoned in gold on its rear fender. Some days, he thought, we keep that promise better than others. A dirty-looking man of indeterminate age was leaning against the back door. A uniformed officer stood nearby. Satisfied he wasn't going to find anything more useful where the body was, McCabe walked over to join them. After a last look back at the body, Maggie followed. "This is the guy who found the girl," the cop tells him. "Says he'd be happy to tell us more about it. Maybe if we could come up with a little whiskey for him." "Really?" said McCabe. "Well, I guess we'll have to think about that." The man steadied himself against the car. He was a skinny little guy, maybe 5'4". His eyes darted between McCabe and Maggie. Clearly he had no love for cops. "What's your name?" McCabe asked. "Lacey. Dennis Patrick Lacey." "Got any ID, Dennis?" The man handed McCabe a Maine driver's license that had expired 3 years ago. Lacey was 55 years old. McCabe would have guessed that he was 10 years older from the look of him. He handed the license back. "You a wrestling fan?" "Huh?" McCabe pointed toward Lacey's t-shirt, a picture of a grimacing wrestler, and the letters WWE adorned the front. Excuse me. "Christ, no, they give you this crap at the shelter. It's stuff nobody else wants." Lacey seemed coherent enough. McCabe glanced at Maggie, who flipped open a mini recording device. This is Detective Margaret Savage, Portland, Maine Police Department. The time is 9:54 p.m., September 16th, 2011. The following is an interview recorded in a vacant lot off Somerset Street, Portland, Maine, between Detective Sergeant Michael McCabe, also of the Portland PD, and Mr. Dennis Lacey, residing at, Mr. Lacey, can you tell us where you live? Wherever I can doss down. McCabe began. Please tell us what you saw tonight. I didn't have nothing to do with it. We don't believe you did, McCabe said gently as he could. We just need to know what you saw to help find whoever did do it. Lacey looked at McCabe as if trying to gauge what degree he could be trusted. He finally shrugged and began speaking. Oh, geez, it was just awful. McCabe could hear traces of a brogue under the man's slur, its lilty rhythms reminding him of his own Irish grandparents. Warm nights like this, Lacey said, I sometimes sneak into the scrapyard just to sit, look at the stars, have a few drinks, read a few poems. If I can afford it, maybe I bring something to eat. To read poems? Maggie asked. What kind of poems would those be? Lacey reached into his back pocket and pulled out a dirty, well-worn paperback copy of Yeats. He handed it to Maggie. I'm a sailor, he said, slurring his words only a little. Able seaman, or I was, not so able anymore. I spent a lot of nights at sea staring at the stars, and I did a lot of reading. You read Yeats, she asked. Yeah, him and a lot of the other Irish poets. I like the sound of the old words. These days I'm all alone, you know, and words are my only company. Nobody bothers me here or tells me to shut my yap. Lacey began to recite, stumbling over only a few of the words. I will arise and go now and go to Innisfree, and a small cabin build there of clay and wattles made. 9 bean rows will I have there, a hive for the honey-bee, and live alone in the bee-loud glade. As the words came out, the cops all stared at Lacey. McCabe too, maybe McCabe most of all. When the old sailor paused, searching his memory, McCabe waited a minute and then filled in Yeats's next line. And I shall have some peace there, for peace comes dropping slow. So you know old William Butler, do you? Said Lacey. Unusual for a cop. McCabe smiled. Unusual for a sailor, too. Now, can you tell me when you first saw the girl? I didn't see her at first. Didn't see nothing. Not until I got up to take a leak, which I did against that pile of scrap over there. I was just zipping up, and I noticed something a little ways off. I walked closer, and there she was, all cut up. Oh, it's a terrible thing, you know, a really terrible thing. How long were you there before you had to take your leak? Asked McCabe. Oh, I don't know, not long, 20 minutes, maybe less. So you got here around 8:30? Oh, geez, I don't know. I don't have no watch or nothing. It was dark. Did you see anything else near the body? Something else? Like what? Like maybe a knife or a razor? Nah, nothing like that. Or maybe some jewelry. What kind of jewelry? Any kind, like maybe a gold earring you thought you could get a few bucks for. No, I didn't see nothing, or I didn't take nothing. I just wished I'd had something to cover her up with. She was lying there exposed to the whole world. You didn't touch her? No, I didn't touch her, and I didn't touch nothing else either. He pulled a pint of whiskey from the sagging pocket of his pants. You mind if I finish what little's left here? There was perhaps an inch of amber liquid left in the bottle. McCabe silently nodded his assent. He wouldn't have minded a little of it himself. What kind of cars were parked nearby? McCabe gestured to the curb, where the techs were checking for tire tread marks and other evidence. I didn't see no cars. Maybe some driving away, but none that were parked. Any that slowed down? Any you could identify? Just cars going along. You couldn't even see what kind of cars they were. Okay, thank you, Mr. Lacey. McCabe looked up and noticed a couple of reporters had arrived, including a crew from the local NBC affiliate. Hey, McCabe, remember me? Josie Tennant, News Center 6. We heard the McCabe Dubois girl was found murdered here. Can you give us a statement? Not at the moment. McCabe turned away. Oh, come on, McCabe. It is Dubois or it isn't. Media relations weren't McCabe's strong suit. He turned to face the reporter. Look, Josie, this is an active crime scene. I'm not entirely sure how you got here so fast, but it would be really helpful if you kept your folks on the other side of Somerset. We're still trying to collect evidence. Tennant and her cameraman reluctantly retreated to their van. The other reporters followed. McCabe turned to Comiskey, the cop who'd found Lacey. Kevin, would you take Mr. Lacey down to 109? If Detective Sturgis is around, see if he'd be kind enough to go to take the rest of Mr. Lacey's statement. Otherwise, I'll do it when I get back. To Lacey, he added, make sure you let us know where we can find you. Here's a card with my number on it. We may have to talk to you again. Do you understand? Aye, aye, Captain. He threw McCabe a shaky salute and staggered off toward Comiskey's car. Canadian whiskey's not so bad, he said, looking sadly at his now empty bottle. Not Irish, but not bad. The homeless man climbed unsteadily into the back of the car. Before Comiskey could follow, McCabe said softly, make sure you check his pockets for a gold earring or anything else he might have picked up here. The patrol officer nodded, slid behind the wheel, turned the key, and opened all 4 windows before starting off. Bill Jacoby and Terry Mirabito were completing their tasks. There didn't seem to be much more McCabe could do. He approached one of the other uniformed police officers. Please keep the reporters out until the body's picked up and the area is clear. And don't listen to any of their bullshit. Don't worry, Sergeant. I've heard it all before. McCabe and Maggie Savage got into Maggie's Crown Vic for the short ride back to the office. Do you want to join Sturgis interviewing Lacey? McCabe asked. Nah, there's no way he's the killer. I'm sure Carl can get whatever else there is to get. I just hope he doesn't start doing his bullying Carl shit. Lacey's got enough problems already. Well, Maggie, that's very thoughtful of you. Maybe instead of interviewing Lacey, maybe we should just get him a bottle of Jameson's and ask him to read us some more Yeats. Maggie didn't laugh. You know, McCabe, I love you dearly, but sometimes you're really an asshole, she said. Anyway, I called Katie's mother and stepfather when I saw the news van pull up. I didn't want them hearing about their daughter's death from News Center 6, so I told them as gently as I could that I thought we'd found her and that we needed to talk to them again. How'd they take it? About what you'd expect. Her mother broke down sobbing, couldn't talk. Just wanted to know if I was sure it was Katie. I told her I was, and she put the stepfather on the phone. He was quieter. They agreed to come downtown and talk to me when I told them how important starting fast could be on cases like this. We'll see if maybe they can remember anything new. Okay, said McCabe. Just drop me off. I want to take another look at the missing persons file on Katie. I'm also going to hit the computer, see if anything's reported anything similar anywhere. Maggie pulled into the curb in front of 109 Middle Street, the Portland Police Department's small headquarters building on the edge of the old port. Maybe you've got the world-famous memory. Does anything ring a bell? McCabe didn't answer. He just sat staring out the windshield. A few drops were splattering against the glass. Why the hell would anybody neatly and precisely cut a girl's heart out of her body? Was it a sexual nutcase? Some kind of anatomical collector filling his trophy case? McCabe? He looked at Maggie and nodded, almost perceptibly. I do remember something, he said. Do you want to share it? Let me check it out first. I also want to set up appointments with a couple of the cardiac surgeons up at Cumberland Medical Center. Find out what it takes to cut somebody's heart out. Do you think this could be the start of a serial thing? Maggie asked as McCabe exited the car. McCabe turned back and leaned in the open window. I don't know, but it sure as hell got the earmarks. The streets were emptier now. As McCabe walked toward the building, he could feel that the air had become noticeably cooler, the first hint of the coming autumn and the dark winter that lay ahead. And that's the end of this section. I hope you can join me again for more Musings of a Murderous Mind on an upcoming session. Thank you very much for listening. I do hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed reading it to you guys and look forward to our next session together. Thank you.